Welcome back to the Simple Kids Ministry Podcast. My name is Jeremy, and my guest today is Dan Pollak. Dan is the elementary director at Flatirons Church in Colorado, one of the largest and fastest growing churches in the country. And we have an amazing conversation about a lot of things. One of them is the things that we can learn from the student ministry world. See, before Dan was a kids pastor, he was a student pastor. And we talk about some of the things he learned in his time in student ministry that he brought with him into the kids ministry space. We also talk about what it's really like on the inside of a really large church. I think sometimes from the outside looking in, we can see a really large church and just imagine they've got everything together, everything is dialed, and we talk about what the reality is actually like. We talk about curriculum, we talk about some trends we're seeing in the kids ministry space. It's a really fun conversation. I think you're going to like it. Before we dive into the episode, I want to invite you to join our Simple Kids Ministry community. It's completely free, and it's a forum for kids ministry leaders to connect with each other, to share ideas, to celebrate wins. We also have a collection of free mini courses and free resource bundles, which, by the way, we just added our VBS starter kit. So we took some of our favorite resources from the main VBS vault, and we put them into a free bundle called the VBS Starter Kit that's available when you join the Simple Kids Ministry community. You can find the link in the episode description, or you can find it at simplekidsministry.com. We'd love for you to be a part of it. Well, without further ado, let's dive into our conversation with Dan Pollak. Well, Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Well, hey, I'm so excited to be here, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, excited to have you on. Listen, we connected a little while back, a few months ago. I was trying to connect with some leaders and get some feedback on Kidmin U and really figure out like what leaders are looking for, what would really help. That was the first time we'd actually jumped on a call. We talked together, and I loved our conversation so much. I had two takeaways from that. Number one is I want to talk to this guy again. And number two, you've got a voice for radio, dude. Like it's silky smooth. And so it was only natural. Let's kill two birds with one stone and have him on the podcast.
There we go. You know, it's funny, Jeremy, I worked at Starbucks for 7 years and I was always the main person handing out drinks at the bar. And the amount of times people told me, and they're like, hey, you have a voice for radio. And I'm like, cool. I don't know what that means, but sick. I don't think I had ever listened to the radio up till then. But hey, that's what the beauty of podcasts is. It's the modern day radio.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, you are currently serving at Flatirons right now. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It's an amazing church. But before we do, I'd love for you to kind of share with us, how'd you get started in kids ministry and how'd you end up doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, I mean, I feel like I've been in church since like day one of my life. I always used to tell people that I was in the womb on Tuesday and I was in the nursery room by Sunday. So I've been to church since day one. My grandma was a huge influence in my life, especially when it came to my faith. And I just always had a heart for Jesus. Like to the point I used to go over to like Bible study fellowship back in the day when I was like 4 or 5 before I started kindergarten. And I would be leading kids to Jesus out on the playground at McDonald's doing communion with McNuggets and ketchup. And growing up, like I just always had a heart to tell others about Jesus and why I love Jesus. And I started serving in 7th grade. And I remember Miss Sharon, I was at a church out in Arizona. She was the kids director and she saw me interacting with my best buddies, younger nieces and nephews that day. And she comes up to me as like we're heading out to the parking lot. So she like chased me down. That classic like example of like a kids ministry person will literally go to the ends of the earth to recruit you to serve. That's what she
100%.
did. All right. And she like chased me down. I'm a 7th grade boy. She's like, hey, do you serve? And I was like, no. She's like, I saw you interacting with those kids. Next week you start. And I was like, okay, cool. I went home that day. I'm like, Mom, I think I'm a volunteer now. And eventually, like, I just started serving in kids ministry. I was a 7th grader put with a group of 2nd graders, which I don't know how many churches allow that nowadays, but they trusted me back then. And as they got older and as I got older, I moved up with them. And basically to the point when I graduated high school, I was like, man, I know I want to work with kids. I came from a family of educators. So it kind of, I was leaning towards that route, but there was a part of me, I was like, what's ministry look like? And I stepped in and to an internship at my church, kind of during a very difficult time with my church. We were going for a massive uh, upheaval with a massive moral failure. And it was during that time that I was like, no, I want to step in and help out any way I can. And so my 1 year internship became what I call a 3 year residency. I was there about 55 hours a week, just serving out of goodness of my heart, and loved it. And eventually I was brought on staff once everything was kind of settled, and did kids ministry as a small group director in the elementary side of things for a while. I did student ministry for a while, and led me back to after working with students. I love students. I love the energy that they bring. But there was a part of me that was like, man, I want to go back to kids ministry. And that's kind of where I'm at now. So I've been doing kids ministry in some way, shape, or form since I was in seventh grade. And I wouldn't want to do anything else.
Wow. Okay, well, at the risk of starting the podcast on such a heavy note, I'm really interested because you mentioned that as you were getting started as a young guy in ministry, a church you grew up in or the church you were at the time had a pretty big moral failure. And I know
Hmm.
for a lot of leaders, when that happens, it would be very easy and very normal, by the way, if you responded to that by saying, well, I don't want to be part of this ministry thing if this is what it looks like. But you didn't do that. Tell me why.
Yeah, man. I was a senior in high school, and our church was like, they were in talks to start opening up multiple campuses. Uh, they had like six services that we're doing, like four on Sunday, two on Saturday. I was serving at five of them, and I would attend one. And my heartbeat was not for just that church. My heart was for the church. And I knew when this happened, it hurt. It was sad, because to see this happen, it took place right after Christmas that year too. So like it was just like the worst possible time that news like that can come out as you begin a new like calendar year. But I was like, hey, this church isn't centered around this one person. This church should be centered around Jesus. And as a senior in high school, I was like, I want to lean in instead of out in that time.
Yeah.
And that's what I continue to do. I was like, hey, like there's going to be families that are hurting because, as much as we don't want it to be tied to like, the lead pastor or somebody there's reasons why people continue to show back up at a church, right? And like I wanted to be there to support people, to support like my own friends in the high school ministry I grew up with, but also like I was like, I just want to be here for the kids to continue to tell them about the gospel, the good news, and that, hey, our faith isn't built on man, but it's built on God.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because people often don't think about the church that gets left behind. You know, we see what happens with that pastor. Obviously, they're going to lose their job, and
Hmm.
in many cases, they may never serve in ministry again. But we often don't think about the aftermath for the people who stay. That's really interesting. Okay, weird way to start a podcast, but you mentioned that, and
Yeah.
I'm really proud of you for staying. And you wouldn't be here today if you hadn't made that choice.
Oh,
Um,
for sure.
I also love, man, you came from the student ministry world. Tell me a little bit about what it was like to go from student ministry to kids ministry.
Yeah. Well, I remember it was at the end of 2019. I had been our elementary small group director for, I guess, 2.5 years at that point, and got to build something pretty cool at the church I was at out in Gilbert, Arizona, Mission Community Church. And uh, I was thriving. Like I had a bunch of coaches. We were recruiting small group leaders like crazy. It like the model was working, and it was amazing to see it happen. And then, and not only was it working in elementary, it was working in our preschool ministry and it was working in our student ministry as well. So it's like we were collectively being a next gen ministry that was serving our families well from like babies all the way through post high school. And it was amazing and remarkable. And I remember all three of our student people on our team decided to transition out at the same time over an 8-week period, all for
Oh
great
my gosh.
reasons. Like our youth pastor, he went out to one of the North Point churches out in the Georgia area. One of our guys, he had always had a heart for this is funny to say it this way, but like dance, like that was his background. Like he was on America's Best Dance Crew, like back in the day and won. So like his heart was like in the dance world,
Sure.
and like ministry, and everything. And it's actually very funny because he just recently stepped back in the ministry. So yeah,
Wow.
he's just popping and locking from the dance floor to Jesus, back and forth. And then our admin was transitioning out to go start. I remember she was stepping into nursing school at the end of 2019, not knowing what 2020 was about to hold.
Oh boy.
And I remember I got asked because a lot of the students that had been in student ministry were like some of the very first kids I ever like served with years ago. And a lot of them actually served in the elementary ministry now with me. And so it just made sense because a lot of the relational like equity I had with them. And so I stepped in, and then I got the honor of a lifetime to do student ministry during a pandemic. Uh, and I've worked through a lot of it since then. Counseling has been amazing, but I got to do student ministry during like COVID and just trying to figure it out. So not only was I trying to figure out like how to do student ministry because I hadn't really delved into that realm, but I was also trying to figure out how to do student ministry from like a YouTube screen or from like Twitch or from the various different like methods that we did. But I do remember as we came back, we were the very first thing back on campus. And I think the one thing I got to bring was I've always been like an organizational, like I like to be very organized, right? Like, and I think that probably taps into the stereotype of kids ministry. Like, kids ministry people are always the more organized compared to the student person.
100%.
So I remember the amount of like the leaders like in student ministry at the time. They're just like, "Wow, you're very organized." I'm like, "Thank you." But I I just kind of brought that into it, and I remember like getting the lead through it. I led through that for about 2 years is the role I was in, and ultimately made the decision after just a very I mean, that was a tough time to do ministry, not just student ministry, but any type of ministry, right? Even out in Arizona, which acted like, COVID was real for 2 weeks, like it was still a difficult time to navigate all these things and the things that teenagers were dealing with. And not only that, like I was kind of still technically a part-time staff person leading an entire youth ministry and like didn't have other staff support. And so like I think that was exciting and fun. And I learned a lot of lessons, a lot of difficult lessons, things that ultimately kind of cracked me for a second, but it allowed me to actually take a deeper sense of myself to set me up better for the long haul down the road. And so I think I love student ministry. I have a heart still for it. And I love that in kids ministry, I kind of get the best of both worlds because we have so many students that start serving for the very
Yeah.
first time in kids ministry. And so I get to kind of do that. But then, I don't want to say like I'm passing them off when, life gets hard to their youth pastor, but like I get to partner with their youth pastor to make sure that, like, hey, we're still having the best impact in the life of these teenagers, and everything too. And so, yeah, student ministry was a lot of fun, man.
Yeah.
I learned so much lessons I'm going to carry for the rest of my life, in leadership and just who I am as a person because of my time in student ministry.
Yeah. It's so cool how much overlap there is between kids and youth, at least when you
Oh,
do it
for
right.
sure.
Like there should be a lot of alignment, there should be a lot of collaboration. And that's been my experience too, man. We have a ton of youth volunteers, and that's a good thing. I know some people can look at it sometimes as a burden because they do require sometimes a little bit more of a hands on approach. You're going to have to guide them a little bit more. But if you take the time to do it, they can be some of the best volunteers in your team. And even thinking about my own story, I think I've shared this a little bit, but the first time I served in kids ministry ever, I was a freshman in high school, and it was kind of
Mm,
by accident. It was like we were moving into a new building for our church. Everybody was being asked to find a place to serve, even the youth ministry.
yeah.
And I just looked around. I had some friends who were doing kids ministry, and so I was like, all right, I guess I'll go with them. And it was huge, man. I mean, there's more to that story, but I ended up getting plugged into a fifth grade classroom with the same guy who was my fifth grade teacher when I was a
Mm,
kid, and I ended up serving there every Sunday for 5 years. I loved it, man. I was all in, and I'm really passionate about students serving outside of the youth group because in my experience, I had a ton of friends who were like heavily involved in the youth group. Like they were on leadership
yeah.
teams, they were like serving at events and all that stuff. but then they graduated and they weren't allowed to be in the youth ministry anymore, and they
Mm,
felt so disconnected from the rest of the church, and some of them didn't make the jump and ultimately fizzled out. But if you've got a place to call home somewhere in the church that you can't age out of, that is like a huge strategic move. And so for me, it didn't matter when I graduated. I can always serve in the kids ministry. Nothing
yeah.
changed for me. And so I think that's so healthy to get volunteers involved. And even hearing your story, man, you started serving when you
Yeah.
were young too. Kids ministry is a great training ground for that, even if you don't stay long term. Well, let me ask, man, because I think coming from the student ministry world into kids ministry, I imagine there were a ton
Mm.
of really interesting things you brought with you. What are some things you stole from the youth ministry world and brought with you to kids ministry?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think like there's the classic stereotypes, and I want to dig a little further than just the stereotype of it, but like, you know, for a long time, student ministry has always had the model of like, hey, they're fun, right? And I actually think like when you dig down into it, fun helps break down barriers. And here's the thing, it doesn't matter if you're a kid or a teenager, you have to have fun. Like I remember reading a book a long time ago about like it was talking about the six things that kids need over time and teenagers, and fun was one of them. Because fun is like how you can relate to someone. Even if you just met them, if you have fun with them, you like I feel like the work that you just did to like break down barriers and to get to know one another, uh, like you expedited that so much because of fun. And I think not just the crazy fun that, like we think about like youth ministries doing back in like, the early 2000s, where, they're giving away like a PlayStation 2 or 3 or whatever. And like all these like crazy, like shenanigans that people did back in the day. But I think like the intentional fun moments to like create space where they allowed, uh, like, teenagers to just get to be teenagers in that moment. And I think taking that same idea into like, hey, like let's just let kids be kids right now. I think so many of
Mhm.
it's funny, like this is the like constant thing that we face just being human. Like adults always dream back to like when they were kids, and kids always dream about when they're ready to be adults, right? And it's like, hey, instead of like you guys dreaming about like the things in the future, let's just enjoy these moments right now that you guys have, like being young and maybe not being exposed to the craziness that's going on around us. But like, hey, just enjoy being like a third grader for a moment. Just enjoy being a first grader or fifth grader or whatever, and having those moments in kids ministry. And why couldn't that be at church? Like, don't
Mhm.
think of it as just church fun. Think of it, it's like, no, like you just get to have fun and it just happens to so like be at church. And so I think that's kind of some of the things that I brought into it. I think another thing in student ministry, they always do a good job of like either speaking up or like knowing their audience well, that they can
Hmm.
push them a little bit. I think that can be the same in kids ministry. Like, I think so many times that you see in kids ministry, it's like, oh, they're kinders, like they won't understand. So like we have to dumb it down. It's like, why are we dumbing it down? Like, I'm not saying like, yeah, we need to talk about like the Christology of Paul, like to a kindergartner, because like no one's like ready for that. But it's just like, hey, what does it look like to like, hey, this is the gospel. Here's the good news. Here's the like Bible passage. Here's the story. Like, how can we talk to them knowing that, like, hey, even if it goes slightly above their heads, it does cause the way their mind works to start thinking about it. And it actually challenges them to think about it more than probably something that, like, if we dumbed it down into some sort of like rhyme, like for a kindergartner, it's like, no, like the longevity of them remembering something might go further if we actually push them a little bit as compared to just simplifying it all the time. And so I think that's something that I brought into like kids ministry, into thinking about like, hey, obviously some things like you can't do like the same thing like with a kindergartner as you can with a fifth grader. But in the same way, you can do the same thing with like a sixth grader that you could with a senior.
Sure.
And so taking that sort of mindset into how we like develop curriculum, how we take our content, how we just create moments for like kids to be able to respond, how we like set up small groups. Like I think that's how we kind of focus in with that. And I think one of the things too, like student ministry has done well for a while, is just the realm of small groups. Um, like that's always been a big part of student ministry for as long as I can remember. It's like, hey, join a small group, join a small group, join a small group. And I think that's actually an area that student ministry has like kids ministry beat is just the realm of small groups of placing consistent leaders into like the lives of teenagers so that way they can like navigate life. Whereas like I feel like kids ministry a lot of times we like to just either settle for like the volunteers we can get, right? Because we've all been in those moments where we've had a shortage of volunteers, where it's like, oh, you can always serve every other week. Okay, that's fine. But it's like, no, like why shouldn't we want the same things for our kids, knowing that statistically speaking, they're actually more open and receptive to the things we're talking about than they are when they're teenagers. And so if we could intentionally set up like key, like consistent leaders in the lives of kids when they're younger and take some of the same mindset, like couldn't we actually help set them up even better for when they are students and they're navigating even more difficulties in life? That, you know, the things that like Gen Alpha and Gen Beta are navigating. And so I think those are some of the things that as I spent that time in youth ministry and student ministry, and then have stepped back into like kids ministry post COVID. And I also love that we talked about post COVID, like that was 6 years ago now too. But
I
we
know.
still
It's
talk
wild.
about it like it was yesterday. But like
Uh,
stepping into it, like, hey, these are the things like that I want to like lean into a little bit and try to like help redefine or maybe remold a little bit in the realm of kids ministry.
Okay, you mentioned 3 things that I think are really
Hmm.
interesting. The fun, I think challenging kids a little bit, and then that relational consistency that comes with small groups. Let's take it one at a time because I actually wanna camp out here for a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, Fun. I think you talked about that and maybe, like, introduce the idea. What did that actually look like in a kids ministry context?
Yeah. Fun. I think we think about like what kids watch, right? Like it's so funny the things that like kids think are fun now, like on YouTube or YouTube Shorts, which is where majority of our kids live. Uh, they watch other people playing like Minecraft videos, where they just watch like not really produced content. Like I think the most produced content they probably watched would be like Bluey, uh, and
Yeah,
like but you think about most of the time like what they're watching on like YouTube, uh, is like not super like produced, not super like content heavy. It's just fun. It's goofy, like, and it's just kind of has this rawness in the sense of like, and when I mean that, like, it's just like it's not like the Disney Channel or the Nickelodeons that like we grew up like watching, right? Whereas like everything was like all the jokes were manufactured in. Like it's more just like it's authentic to like what they want. And so I think about in the realm of like what we do, like filming like goofy videos, like in kids ministry, like announcement videos, right? Like I remember back in the day before I actually stepped into youth ministry, we are kind of I feel like a little bit ahead of the game in the preteen ministry that I was an intern in, but we used to film like announcement videos that like I've shown kids. Those videos are now like 10 to 12 years old now. But it was me sitting in the back of a pickup truck going through a Circle K car wash. And which like people ask me all the time, they're like, how did you like get allowed to do that? I'm like, hey, it's Circle K. They're just happy you used their car wash. But like
it's
we would
true.
sit in the back of the car wash, right? And like I would just be announcing, like, hey, sign up for camp right now. Like, and like as I'm just getting slapped in the face, like a seal's like hitting me with all the like things going on. And it's like that stuff is still funny to like kids now. And it's like that
Yeah.
wasn't produced heavily. That was like a GoPro, like in the back seat of a car as we went for a car wash. Like, and I think that's the stuff like they don't want super produced. They want fun. They want people that can just be their real selves, like on the camera, as like that's how they perceive you to actually be in real life too. Like, not like an actor per se. I would say too, like when it comes to fun, like, the games like, if you do games, like, on stage, like, or, like, in the room, like, you don't need to go, like, too crazy. Like, you don't need to just blend the Happy Meal in a blender anymore. Like, to just get a shock and awe, like, just, like, goofy games where, you know, a kid is doing something, like, up on stage that's goofy, like, wearing a wig and catching, like, Easter eggs as, like, the rest of the room, like, throws, like, these plushy Easter eggs into it, like, for a game on Easter, right? Like, that game killed this weekend. just because there's 100 kids throwing Easter egg, like plushy Easter eggs at another kid, sort of stuff. So I think like some of those things, it's like some people as they're hearing this are like, that sounds like my worst nightmare. But it's like I think a little bit of controlled chaos isn't necessarily a bad thing when it comes to fun in kids ministry.
Yeah. And I think what it is, if I had to put my finger on it, I think we try and avoid the messy part of it. Like kids ministry people, like you said earlier, we're often super organized, we're planners, we try and keep things structured on a weekend service or midweek or anything with
Hmm.
kids. And so when I heard you saying that, my mind immediately went to, well, how do I pick up the mess? How do I get the kids back in order? Like my
Yeah.
mind went to logistics, right? And I think sometimes if we're not careful, we can sap the fun out of it because you were
Hmm.
like, hey, this is a simple idea. Let's just go for it and figure it out. And it was a hit. And I think if we're willing to sit in the mess a little bit, it actually might make our ministry way more engaging. Because I think the same thing is true when it comes to like that level of challenge, right? That you talked about with youth
Yeah.
ministry. This might be a good segue where I think sometimes um, how do I articulate this? If we're not careful, we can hold kids back, right? In the
Yeah.
same way that our attempt to plan and have things structured can, if we're not careful, take the fun out of something. Also, our teaching, if we're trying to make it like perfectly age appropriate, it might mean that we're not willing to challenge kids with a big idea. Take me into that. What's the appropriate way to like hold that tension? Because I do think there's something to be said for keeping things developmentally appropriate, but there's also something to be said for pushing kids a little bit and challenging them. How do you hold that tension?
Yeah. I think for me, man, like one of the things I always, if I'm not talking to kids, how am I going to know what they enjoy? Or how do I know what they know? And I think for me, that's something that I always like prioritize like now of like, I obviously like running a ministry, running a, like, you know, a volunteer team that's fairly large, and all these things. Like, I don't get as much hands-on like time, like one-on-one where like, in a small group light setting with kids as like I used to, like when I first started serving. But I still make it a priority to like get to know kids, to get to know what they like. Not only because like I want to set the example for my leaders, but it's like I want to know what are they thinking.
Hmm.
Um, and so for me, it's like as I have conversations with kids, like whether it's a 5 year old or whether it's like a fifth grader and everything in between, like I think the things I'm noticing is like, oh, they know a little bit more than you realize they do. Now, it's part of good stewardship in our sense of leaders to make sure that we are mindful of things like, hey, like there's probably certain things that when it comes to talking about it, it's like we should focus on more equipping like parents to be able to have some of these conversations like baptism, right? Like we'll mention baptism, we'll talk about baptism, but I actually think a parent should help like lead that conversation more than like, the classic like back in the day, like, oh no, your pastor had to baptize you. It's like, well, no, if your parent's a believer, I would love for your parents to like because they're the number one influence in that child's life. But I think about too, like the content that we're talking about I think if we take it just like a slight half step above, like especially like in a teaching like way, right? On stage, like if you're doing like a small group, large group model, which is like the context of like what I've done and what I'm currently doing, like the teaching should almost leave you like thinking and not have be given the answer right away. And so I think the way we shape up things like what are speaking to a K1 crowd or to like a preteen like crowd, it's like, hey, what are the questions that we can ask that are like age appropriate that take them a half step? So that way, when they go to their small group and they start to unpack it and they make it applicable here, like they make a story like feel like it's actually real. Like the moment that they just discussed, like in the teaching or in the episode of, well, whatever curriculum you're using, and so I think for me, those are some of the things like I'm thinking about as we set some good tension. Uh, Getting to know what kids like and what they're like into. Like I think we always have to have that like mindset of like learning just as much from our kids as we are from anyone else.
Yeah. I've started to talk a little bit more openly about my thoughts on video teaching versus live teaching. Um, I think there's an era where video teaching was like in every single church, and it probably still is. Um, but as I hear you talking about some of these things, I'm like, a lot of that I don't think is possible if you just press play on a video. Like it's
Mhm.
impossible whenever you're producing that video from wherever you are, especially if you're getting it from a publisher who's trying to mass produce it for all American churches everywhere, you know?
Yeah.
Um, it's hard when you're producing that video to account for the insights that you're talking about because you're talking about, I want to get to know these kids. I want to know how they're thinking about things. I want to know the questions that they're asking. I want to do small little tests to see how much they're actually engaging with to see if I can push them a little bit more. If I just press play, I can't do that. But if I've
Yeah.
got a human, like a caring adult, who is responsible for
Mhm.
guiding that experience, they 100% can. They can tailor it to their kids. They can push them a little bit. And so I think, that's not what this conversation is about. I don't wanna, like, hijack it and turn it into video versus live teaching. There will be other times for that, and I've already talked about that. But I love what you said because I do think it's a tension that we hold. There's not a right answer. Like,
Mhm.
it's not okay just to stay in the safe area that is developmentally appropriate, and it's also not okay to go on the other side and do crazy big words and crazy
Yeah.
big ideas that kids aren't ready for.
Oh,
So,
for sure.
just fun story. Um, I'm not gonna name names or anything, but I've got two babies at home, which means that my wife loves to pick out like storybooks and things like that for the kids.
Mhm.
And we're constantly reading them with our kids. I mean, my daughter will, we started putting the books on a shelf that she can reach. So she'll grab them, bring them to us, we'll read it, she'll put it back, bring another one. And it's the same like 5 books that we will read for like an hour. And this is life right now. But there's one of those storybooks that I actually, I really don't like it. I was actually kind of like disappointed my wife spent money on it because it's one I've seen before. And honestly, it's a great concept. It's a Christian storybook, but it's filled with like huge words, like
Mm.
things that like only a theologian would say. Like I know adults who don't know those words. And this was a book that was made for toddlers. And every time my daughter brings it to me, I actually like I'm a little upset. I was like, okay, I guess I'll read it for you. But there's part of me that's like, she's not ready for this. Like, she's not ready for these ideas.
Mm.
And I actually want to be really careful about like how my child progresses and what they learn and in what order. And maybe I obsess over that
Mm.
more than the average person because I was a kids pastor for so long and because they're my kids and I just want what's best for them.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something to be said for like having small steps where you're pushing and challenging. Maybe not going from step A to step like D, but being
Oh,
like, hey,
yeah.
I think you're ready to go to like step B. Or maybe I see you're handling B really well, so let's try C. So I love that you're doing that. Is there any part of your ministry where that really takes a front and center role? Like what do you think of when we talk about challenging kids? Is it where you teach on stage with kids? Is this something that you would more train small group leaders when they have more time and space for this? Like where do you see the appropriate time to push kids a little bit?
I think this is where the role of a small group leader is so important, because, like, I do think, like, we use video content currently at Flatirons, and as it is the case with a lot of, like, multi-site churches, like, that's kind of what we probably will use for a while, uh, but I think that's where the role of a small group leader to come in, because here's the thing, the idea is they have the relational, like, equity, I believe, to be able to actually push that, uh, to be able to, like, "Hey, like, I know you could think a little bit more," right? Like, I know I've had moments where I've led, like, 4th or 5th grade boys, and, you're lucky, like, at the end of the day, if you got 3 minutes of just, like, talking about Jesus, and you're supposed to have small group for 15 to 20 minutes, and you're just like, "Okay, like, I think they" like, you said the word "others," and it sounded like "others," and then they just started mooing, and then you just lost them. Right? That
Yeah.
happened to me. Actually, one of the very first messages I ever gave on stage, I got mooed, not booed. I got mooed off stage. So that was a great confidence booster. It was like, there
Wow.
goes my Andy Stanley career. But um, I think that's where the small group leader though is like able to push in as these leaders. That's why like consistency matters. I believe, like in the life of a small group leader, as they really get to know their kids and the kids who are consistently showing up into their crew every single week. Like, I think that's where a leader can, like, push in, or they know, like, when they could take a half step up a little bit
Hmm.
because they've spent the time getting to know that kid, hopefully. They've spent the time to get to understand the concepts of what that kid walks in with every single week. They get to know, like, what matters to that kid. They also know what that kid has done, but also what they have the potential to do, and I think that's where, like, a healthy small group leader who is like really bought into what you're trying to do in your kids ministry, that's where they could take it to that next half step. And honestly, that's what we empower our small group leaders to want to do, um, is to take it. Like they're in a way getting to shepherd that child in that moment. And I think that's so, so, so important.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, we've talked a little bit about some of the benefits that come from youth ministry culture that we can learn from, that we can
Hmm.
apply in kids ministry. And I will say, I think over the last, uh, I don't know, let's say 2 decades, I think that has really helped make some healthy shifts in the kids ministry space. Like it used to be, there's a very real way of doing kids ministry. It was the Sunday school model,
Hmm.
um, and I think that yielded fruit for a long time, but I think we've been able to see like, hey, what is the youth ministry doing really well and how can we learn from that? So for instance, large group, small group model, we stole that from youth ministry and it's
Yeah.
great. It's been a game changer for so many people. I also think even the approach to small groups and that relational depth and consistency, like we took that from youth ministry. That's amazing. I think the way that we lead, where it's not just, back in the day, it was one person who was like a little worker bee who did all the work. They didn't develop
Hmm.
people and they were just trying to juggle all the things at once. And now youth ministry culture has kind of taught us, hey, what would it look like if we tried to develop people and disciple people to carry
Hmm.
some of the load? By the way, that's biblical. It's our job to
Yeah.
equip the saints
Yeah.
to do the work of ministry. But for some reason, it took a little bit for us to actually catch on to that. So I think youth ministry culture has helped a ton, and even I would say the profile of a kids pastor has changed a little bit too. Again, in the past, it used to be somebody with an education background, often,
Hmm.
leading the kids ministry, and that's great. That will always help. But now you're seeing a profile of somebody who is really using their leadership gifts a little bit more. And I think that's a very
Hmm.
healthy and welcome change for kids ministry. All of that is the lead up to the other part of this conversation, which is
Yeah.
like, I wonder what parts of youth ministry culture we've tried to adopt in kids ministry that maybe like we're forcing. Maybe we're taking some things that aren't meant to be applied in youth ministry and maybe it's not working quite the same way. I've got some thoughts on this of what some of those things might look like, but I'm
Let's hear it.
curious I'm curious what you've noticed in that regard because you're more close to it than I am. I haven't spent dedicated time on staff leading in youth
Yeah.
ministry. From your perspective, have you caught yourself and said, "Hey, I'm tempted to implement
Hmm.
this in my kids ministry, but maybe that actually isn't maybe that was perfect for youth but not for kids." What have you seen in that regard?
I think the one thing that I notice sometimes with kids ministry, they feel uh, like it feels like the classic younger sibling syndrome, right? Where like they feel like they almost have to copy identically what student ministry does.
Yeah.
And like that's not healthy because like there should, like you said, there should definitely be things that take place in student ministry that should not take place in kids ministry. Um, and so I think the balance with kids and student ministry is that hey, you should have a healthy kids ministry, like in a healthy kids ministry looks like hey, it should be a good on ramp for like students to start serving, right? Like that should be a healthy kids ministry. You should be partnering with parents, like setting up good partnerships in that way. You should be like I think setting up the idea of like what small groups look like, so that way like when they get in the students like there's I don't know what the idea is, just like they are able to like continue to build upon the foundation that we have set. I think so many times in kids ministry right now, and I'm trying to think of exact examples, but I feel like we have to feel like we have to build the foundation and the house. And it's like, no, that's not how that works. Like we should be planting the seeds, we should be setting the soil right, like maybe get the layout for the foundation. And then it's like, no, a healthy kids ministry then passes that off and allows the student ministry to kind of build a house. And I think the realm of kids ministry is like, because kids ministry leaders sometimes can kind of come in with a woe is me like mindset where like people don't care about kids ministry. They feel like they have to overprove themselves instead of actually being good stewards with their student person to be like, hey, no, like here's the groundwork. I'm passing this off to you to now like continue to build upon it. I think that's where I've seen a little bit of like the I don't know, disconnect with kids and student ministry. I think one thing too, kids ministry feels like they always have to measure up against like student ministry success, and they feel like they have to do it at the same place, whereas like kids ministry is like, hey, I don't think you should be measuring success, like whether it's through like data or things like that, in the same way that student ministry is. Like, don't measure your numbers of like kids who go to BBS against like kids who are going to student camp, right? Student camp's always going to be the more fun one, like exciting. Not to say BBS isn't. All right, I know you've written a book on BBS, and I very much love kids camps and BBSs. But like, hey, like let's not take away the thunder of like what student ministry is doing just because like we feel like we have to compete in that realm. So I don't know
Yeah.
if that was the best way of answering that. That's just kind of in the top of my head right now of like, man, I think that's where like kids ministry feels like they want to try to be the younger sibling to copy, but also in the same way try to be the older sibling to control what student ministry does. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, I like the way that you framed that because I don't know if I would have thought about it that way or described it that way, but it clicked for me when you framed it that way. Because I think what I've noticed people doing, and I've caught myself doing as well, is having this feeling that I've got to fully form these little disciples before they get in youth ministry. Like
Yeah.
I've got to do all of it and then hopefully they don't break them in youth ministry. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
guess somewhere deep down that has been the pressure, and I think over the last like 5 years or so I've had to shift and say, listen, we're a team. And to
Mm,
your point, like each one of us is going to have a different piece that we own in their journey. And that's not to say that we're not trying to create fully formed disciples by the end of kids ministry, but it does mean the way that we do our teaching and the way that we structure some things, it's like,
mhm,
hey, we're trying to lay a foundation that they can continue building on in middle school. And so I think as you described this, I think that's a reason why sometimes we force some teaching on kids that they
mm,
really should wait till middle school for. Like, if
yeah.
you actually, okay, this is my pet peeve, so I'm going to try and be gentle about this. But if you look at most curriculum publishers and you look at their oftentimes 3-year scope and sequence, I can find maybe like at least 30% of the Bible stories in there that kids have no business learning. Like, if you actually
Yeah.
understand the theology, you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. First of all, like sometimes it shouldn't be there because kids will just not get it, right? It's like just way over their head. So
Yeah.
that's one camp. But there are others where it's like this is a really nuanced idea that could actually be dangerous if a kid doesn't really understand multiple angles of it. Like for
Mm,
instance, um, why do we teach the story of Samson to kids? That listen, I got things to say to describe who Samson is. Samson
yeah.
is the guy who constantly like lives at the gym and chases girls. That's what he
Oh
does. He's
yeah.
not a good guy. Like God redeemed some of that, but like that's not a story that we teach appropriately for kids. Or the story of Noah and the flood. That's a story where like the Lord wipes out people on the face of the earth, and yet we tell it like it's a farm story of all these
Oh
animals
yeah.
coming and like it's cute. Or even like another one is and I didn't even catch this until a couple years ago when a volunteer complained to me and they said, Jeremy, why are we teaching the story of Abraham being asked to sacrifice his son Isaac on an altar? And I was like, at first I thought she was just being a little bit high maintenance, but then I looked at it and prayed through it and I was like, wow, that's actually kind of a lot to ask of kids. And at the time we were
Mm,
teaching that to preschoolers. And it's like, what are they supposed to do with that? Are they supposed to go home and think that their parents might take them on an altar and sacrifice them? You know, like
yeah.
some of these stories are way too big. And so, all of this to say, if we believe that we have to teach kids everything that they need to know before middle school, it's going to drive us to make decisions like that that actually might not be for their benefit. But if we were willing to say, we're on the same team and I trust my youth pastor, I know that when I hand them off, they're going to continue the work that we started. It
Yeah.
transforms everything. And I also think, just generally speaking, the way that we structure our teaching in youth ministry and kids can and should be different, you know? Like, I'm just a big believer that kids learn best through story. And so that's
Mm,
why, whether you're teaching the Old Testament or the New, like, finding ways to frame it within, like, something that actually happened. You know, I think sometimes we get into kids ministry, or in the New Testament rather, and we teach it the same way we would in youth, where we camp out in the book of James and we try and teach a principle. And
yeah.
it's possible to do that. Like, we certainly can. But I think the best way that kids learn is if you had an example of that principle in the Bible story and helped it
Mm,
come to life. Whereas if I were in a youth group, I could go straight to James chapter 4 and I could just talk about that idea and just get straight to it, you know,
yeah.
and just make it all about application. All that to say, like, I do think that trust element between kids
Mm,
pastors and youth pastors can be a game changer because we're all on the same team. And
yeah.
by the way, if it works both sides, where we're working together to create one seamless plan for how we want to disciple kids over time, how much more successful would we be? Like,
Oh
I,
my
I
gosh.
dare say a lot of churches don't have a true partnership there. There might be a
Yeah.
little bit of a partnership, but in your mind, you've seen both sides of it. What would it look like to actually be a little bit more aligned? Like, how could that
Yeah.
relationship be better, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. If you're waiting for a family ministry pastor and next gen pastor to mandate this from you, like, don't. Like, you need to start that conversation. Like, if you're not getting a coffee, like, every other week or biweekly or, with or lunch, like, with your student person or, vice versa, like, what are you doing? I don't think you can say you're truly for the next generation if you aren't willing to partner with the other half that works with that, like, side of the thing, right? Like, with the next gen. And I think working together to be able to have the best impact in the lives of your kids and the teenagers that you are partnering together with, like, you have to understand where they're coming from. Because here's the thing too. A lot of times student ministry people, they're the ones that, like, more times than not, they've gone to seminary because some of them maybe have some bigger aspirations. So they understand theologically where, like, they're talking about, for the most part. They also, like, they know how to bring in a lot of good, like, insight into just things that, like, truly what teenagers are facing and um what how to, like, navigate various issues that arise. And I don't think, like, we give student ministry credit for that. Another thing that student ministry people do well is network. Now, you could say it's like, well, no, they all have egos they got to boost. And it's like, no, that's not the case for every student ministry person. All right.
Yeah.
Uh, but, like, they know how to network. Kids ministry people and, maybe it's because you feel like if you're listening to this, it's like you're like, "Well, I'm only part-time," or, like, "I'm actually in a volunteer role, like, leading this ministry." Like, I'm not even an actual staff member because, like, that's the reality too. That's how several, like, I mean, a percentage of churches still run in America, is that it's not necessarily a designated full-time role that runs the kids ministry, but it's like, hey, like, take the initiative. Look at, like, meeting with your, like, student pastor. Make that a routine part to get to know what's happening in each other's ministry better, how you can support one another. One of the things I always loved doing when I was, I just recently moved campuses here at Flatirons, but my last campus where I was over all of kids ministry, at that particular campus, like, part of one of my responsibilities was running a child education. And the way I did child dedication was like I would always have designated prayer leaders. And I really tried to use like prayer leaders who were actual parents. So when they prayed over like other parents, like it was that cool intentional moment. Well, my student pastor was a parent. And I'm like, hey man, like I would love for you to come be a part of this. Like I know child dedication, like you probably don't really know what that is, but I would love for you to come be a part of this. And I would love to help support you in any way. So like showing up at each other's events, like to see what's happening. Like I would go to youth worship nights or camp celebration nights. He would come to child dedications and baptism classes. We would host next gen orientations together. Like that was our partnership. And so for me, I've always found it of like, hey, I love what student ministry does. I think the work that they do is so important. I also know that the work that we do in kids ministry is so important. So like let's work together so that way we can like not be two separate ministries like trying to push against each other, but actually be one cohesive next gen ministry that like, hey, it's like the moment I pass off a fifth grader into student ministry because they're heading into middle school, like I know they're in good hands because I know the student pastor is going to pick up exactly where we left off.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I think it all comes down to that partnership
Hmm.
and being willing to trust each other. And to everything you're saying, that takes investment. It takes time. It means, hey, we're going to get lunch or get coffee, whatever. We're not just going to show up to only the mandatory meetings and then hope we've got chemistry and hope we've got alignment.
Yeah.
Like all that. I just think about, I'm a USC football fan. We've got our returning quarterback Jaden Mayava coming, and in
Hmm.
this spring camp, man, he's got a bunch of freshman wide receivers. And so his big thing right now is, how do I build chemistry with my receivers?
For
That's not
sure.
just on the football field. That's not just practice. They're getting barbecues, they're hanging out, they're doing that stuff. And all of that shows up like in the game in the fourth quarter when you're under pressure and you know the tendencies of your teammate and you know how to work together. Same thing here, man. When you invest in that relationship with your youth pastor or vice versa, it really pays dividends long term. What I love to shift to a little bit, you mentioned it there, is you recently had a transition from working at one of the Flatirons campuses
Hmm.
to the main one. And for those who aren't really familiar, maybe with like multi site dynamics, oftentimes like the campuses are a little bit more indicative of like a regular church in size and sometimes even the way you operate. Like that's, I think more relatable is what happens at like a regular campus. But then you get to the main one or the broadcast campus, and it's usually like it's way bigger, the scale is different, the way they operate is different. And that's kind of what you would think of as a traditional mega church. As you transitioned from like one of the campuses to the main campus, what was that like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm now like several months in at this point, and uh, I mean, I will admit, like, it was kind of a case of like variety of different things that kind of led to me like several departures of staff. And I'm not gonna lie, like when they first asked me, I was like, no. I was like, "Can I say no?" Uh, like,
Uh,
it was something I had to wrestle with because, like what you just mentioned, right? Like, the campus I was at was averaging, like, it was technically, like, a mega church in its, like, size-wise, right? Like, just for that campus alone, like, we had around 1,100 people on a weekend overseeing a kids ministry of, like, around 200, and everything, and this was asking me to kinda step in for a long-term plan of like multiple roles, but like to step into an elementary ministry at our broadcast campus to focus in there because they had just gone through a lot of hiccups over the last couple of years. And this elementary ministry had four times the amount of kids on average than my entire kids ministry I had at the campus I was just at. And here's the crazy part. I had almost the same amount of volunteers. I
wow.
had almost the same amount of volunteers at the campus I was just at over our whole kids ministry to the amount of volunteers I was inheriting at our current campus, of the broadcast campus. And so I would say like the biggest thing I did this in both cases when I first started at Flatirons, and then also when I started at our broadcast site in Lafayette, Colorado. The first thing I did was I just want to know the people I serve with. And so I prioritized like sitting down with about uh, as many volunteers as I could. I said for my first 2 months, which I transitioned in November. So, like we're heading into Christmas time and, we had Christmas services and, had a plan for all of that. But I was like, I'm going to make this a priority. If I'm going to have any stake for the future, like I need to know the people I'm serving with. And so I scheduled as many coffees, meals, Zoom calls as I could. I think I met up words of like 80 like to 85 volunteers in the span of 2 months, which was
Wow.
insane. I'm a very extroverted person. I will say that pushed me to my limits because I was like, that's a lot of getting to know people. But here's the thing, I'm so glad I did that because what I was able to then step into after Christmas and to be able to focus in on now, even like what I'm currently working on, is it set the groundwork of like, hey, I'm not just some like random person coming in here, like that's going to leave in 18 to 24 months, right? The statistic. But I'm like, this is my heart. this is my story. This is how God has worked through my story. This is how he continues to work through my story. This is my heart for kids ministry. And like also taking the time to hear their stories. And I'm so glad I did because all the stories I got to hear, like, they continue to fuel me to wanna meet with more volunteers and to hear their stories, and, like, it just created an equal playing ground of, like, "Hey, I'm not here to sit on some pedestal, uh, because I'm at the main campus now and just, like, fly by the seat of my pants." Like, no, like, I'm here to serve alongside you, to link arms, and, like, "Hey, we're gonna move this ministry forward." And, uh, it's been good, man. Like, I'm loving, uh, the challenges that arise. I love the trust that has been placed on me by our leadership, by my campus pastor, just to be able to try some things and be like, "Hey," and that was, like, part of it, like, when I was sitting down with our next gen pastor and even, like, one of the guys on our lead team, they asked me, like, if I would consider coming over. I was like, "Hey," and I asked when I make some decisions that I know might not be popular, not because, like, what I was doing was like, "Hey, like, you're doing this wrong," but I know I'm gonna push against some gears, maybe some sacred cows, that have been calling, like, this ministry, home for a while. I wanna know that I have your guys' support, and I laid out my plan and everything, and they're like, "Absolutely," and they've been behind me, continuing to pour into me to make sure I don't get swallowed up by the beast. But also like, hey, like we trust Dan, like we think he's the right person to be stepping into this role. And I feel like I have a lot of trust right now from leaders to parents that I've been building up with to like my fellow staff that's on our kids ministry team at this campus and to leadership. And it's been going good. I'm enjoying it. I love a good challenge too. So
Yeah. You're in the right spot, man, because I think when you're at a large growing church, it's gonna push you and it's gonna require a lot of investment. And I think it's so funny what you said because I think the knock on really large churches from the outside is that, oh gosh, there's no way they can be relational. There's no way they can actually like be personal and know people. And what I've found is actually the opposite. I've found that a lot of those churches, the reason that they've grown to where they are is because they fight so hard to stay
yeah.
small. Nobody would have
Mm.
asked you to go meet with 85 people right at the end of the year, heading into Christmas time. Nobody expected that of you, but you knew this is really important. I'm going to start with my team, and my team is going to do that for others, right? So I think that would surprise some people. What are some other things that maybe surprised you or you think would surprise other people about being a part of a big church? Because I think sometimes it looks like, oh my gosh, they've got an unlimited budget, unlimited volunteers, everything must be good and they must have everything figured out because look how big they are. But we both know that's not the case. What ended
Yeah.
up surprising you that you didn't see coming?
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking bigger is always better, like that's not the case. Now, here's the thing. I'm very fortunate, and what I love doing at Flatirons and like we like the opportunities that we get right now. Like I love the heart of this church and what we're trying to do here out in the Front Range, Denver area, in Colorado, knowing that we get to reach a very unique crowd. But with that said, like Flatirons has had a unique history of kind of like we call it pre-sabbatical and post-sabbatical. So our like lead pastor, he was actually on an episode of Carrie Newhoff. If for all you podcast listeners, you can go listen to that. But our lead pastor was put on a forced sabbatical right before COVID. And here's the thing. What I loved about this and when I heard about him speak about it, um, the work that he did and the realization of like, hey, like we're a massively fast growing church and he wasn't healthy, and also the organization wasn't healthy. So, with all that said, that took place. COVID didn't happen, and the church over the last like 5, 6 years has kind of been like reshaping itself here out in the Front Range part of Colorado, and I've loved it because uh, they're realizing like, hey, just because we were bigger didn't mean that we were the best at what we did. So taking the time to learn from others, from other great like ministry minded, like strategically minded people, like coming in and developing our staff, like from people like a Katie Cole to like Lee Coe, like some really great minds in that, but also like, hey, like the systems that like we thought should like we didn't want to put in place for some reason or form. Like for example, they didn't start background checks in kids ministry up until 4 years ago. Which you're like,
Wait,
I'm
not at
sorry,
all?
what? Not at all. Um,
Oh my
which,
gosh.
yeah, hey, yeah, all right. Everybody just heard that and they're like, I'm so sorry, what? They're like,
Yeah.
that's the one thing we have for us. So
Yeah.
like that was something that like Flatirons just like they were a church that they didn't want to create like systems and stuff because they thought systems sometimes can drown out how you see people, right? But that's
Hmm.
only if you allow it. If you set good systems in place, it actually allows you, like we've talked about, to be able to see people better. And maybe people that you didn't realize that you weren't seeing. And I think that's the important part. And so over the last, I've been here now just over 3 years, and we've gotten to help like build some like clarity and structure because it's like, hey, we didn't have job descriptions for our volunteers. Like people didn't really know what they were doing in kids ministry. Like the same person that would host would also be the person that was helping run the room, helping like do bathroom runs, like helping with checkout. And I'm like, well, hey, that's how you lead to volunteer burnout. Like having like we didn't really have small groups. Like they said they had small groups, but then like I watched it happen. I was like, well, first off, that small group has 35 people. That's what we call a classroom in the Colorado school system. All right. Like that is just like these things of like, hey, you're like, wait, what? Like people would think all the time like, oh, like I need to go to a large church to like learn from them and see what they're doing. And it's like, hey, like we looked like a shiny penny. And here's the thing, I don't want to downplay the amazing ministry that they were doing because they were doing a lot of great ministry, but it's like doesn't always mean that we have it all figured out. And so that's why for me, and I know a lot of people now here on staff, like we prioritize like going to learn from people larger than us, like churches like, like a North Point, a Southeast, Traders Point, like churches like that. But also like I want to go talk to the like smaller churches in our area and see like, hey, we're serving the same communities. Like what are you guys doing? Like I could care less about the size. I just want to learn from different perspectives, different voices, and just see like, hey, what are you doing well? How can we like work together like with the same sort of mindset and adapt and take it into it? And so I think that's the beauty of like where Flatirons is now. And now we're setting up some great like structures and systems, not only in kids ministry. Now we background check everybody, thank the Lord. But like all these different things of like, hey, so our student ministry is getting better with systems, our spiritual formation. There's just more like processes that are actually allowing us to be more intentional with people now than there has ever been.
Yeah. It was so funny. The biggest church I ever worked at, I remember like starting to work there and I just assumed like I don't know, I put this church on a pedestal and so I just assumed that when I showed up everything would be dialed, the systems would be set, all that stuff would just be top notch. And I got inside and I was like, "Whoa, you guys don't have this, you don't have that." And it was kind of
Yeah.
like what you were talking about where we were kind of just running on momentum. And I learned something there. Number one, big churches don't have everything figured out. That's probably
Mhm.
the biggest takeaway. But number two, I learned that sometimes with fast growing churches, they're growing so fast that they almost don't have time. The fast growing churches are just trying to keep up. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of times they just moved into a new building. They just expanded their kids area. They just had to recruit 100 more volunteers to keep
Yep.
up with whatever. And, you're just trying to keep up, man. And so I think for all the people who just look at a big church and think, man, they've got everything figured out. No, they don't. And you can be faithful wherever you're at, whether you've got 10 kids or 100 or 1,000 or whatever. It's about being faithful with whatever God's called you to. Okay,
Absolutely.
the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up, because I want to honor our time together too. But I know there's a temptation for large churches to create their own stuff all the time, especially curriculum. Like I've
Yeah.
been on teams where they're like, well, we're a big church, so I feel like we just have to create our own curriculum. Why would we buy it when we already have a creative team and we could do this? Is that something you guys have thought about? And if so, what's that conversation like these days?
Yeah. I mean, like right now we're kind of in the midst of conversations. Like several other churches, like kind of throughout the country right now, like we found ourselves like going for a generosity initiative, just for what the next like, 3, 4, 5 years holds for us as a church. And we are very fortunate for ours. And like I think what one of the things that we want to do is like we want to develop our people uh well, and like obviously stuff that makes like Flatirons what Flatirons is. And part of that was like, hey, like with kids ministry, like what does it look like for us to like create our own content? They had done their own content pre-COVID, and then kind of when restructuring and stuff like that took place, they actually went to a curriculum that we've used since that point, kind of since 2021 is when we started using it. And here's what I'll say, like, I think we could do a lot more intentional job of adapting the curriculum to match us well. I think the thing of like, hey, like we want to teach our people like our values and the things that we value as a church. Like I think naturally that sparks the conversation is like, well, we should create our own content for that. And it's like, well, what if it's a good mixture of both? Like, what if it's actually just, getting the bare bones of like a pre-existing content and then being more intentional of how we set it up to adapt it, and then adding certain things of like, hey, we don't have to use the teaching videos that we get out of our content, right? Like we could like film our own. Like it doesn't have to be, just to throw it out there, an episode of like Story Lab or so and so show from Amazing Life Orange, right? Like it could be like one of our own kids pastors or a host like teaching like in a video. So it feels more like our own. Like and I think that's kind of where we're at right now. We're having some conversations. We just experimented with kind of like our pilot. If I had to explain to people what a pilot felt like, because I was like, "Hey, it's like what TV used to be," and they're like, "Wait, what?" And I was like, "Phew, yeah, I forgot. Netflix just drops it all on at once." But
Yep.
like, I was like, "Hey, this is our pilot weekend, so next weekend there's not going to be another new episode, all right?" Like, uh, we're to take it back and everything, but we kind of did a pilot of like the stuff we've been working on in regards to situational videos that we've been kind of experimenting with, as well as our teaching videos. We filmed our own worship stuff. Uh, and I think that's something that we are rethinking through. And I think it's setting a good boundary of like, do we need to go all the way, like, and like create it from scratch? Or could we take something and really adapt it in a way, which honestly, most curriculum that you buy, you should be adapting. You should definitely be adapting. If you're just using it like for the way it is, like, yeah, you're not gonna. They have to. We've talked about this, right? Like they have to write it in a way that is able to hit a broad scope, but you should be taking that to your church's context, to the people, like, and being able to adapt that in a way that best fits your church. So if we did that, couldn't we like just like continue to build around that? And I think that's the conversations we're having right now. We just hired a new kids pastor that will kind of help oversee a lot of those things. And I think those are the conversations that they get to have the benefit of having now, and be like, hey, cool. Uh, I think a lot of times when churches, especially larger churches, they feel like they have to create their own. And I don't know if this is, I'm gonna be careful on how I say this, but it's like, do we need to prove something? Or it's like because we
Mm,
can doesn't mean we have to. Like, here's the thing. I've talked to some of like my friends who work at some of the largest churches in the country who do their own content. And here's the thing, they're like, "Hey, it could be better," but staffing wise, they don't have the support there, right? Or, because of how they have to structure as an organization, that it's just like they're not to the full extent of like what it could be from like a Grow or Amazing Life or Awana or whatever you want to label out there, right? And so I think that's kind of where we're thinking about what it looks like, but we may not need to go all the way from like, recreating the wheel.
yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that because I just had um, one of my friends on that we worked with at Sandals, and her job was
Hmm.
to lead the team that created original curriculum. And the only thing they did was kids' content. And so they created a 3-year
Hmm.
scope and cycle. And then when they completed it, they just decided, hey, I think we're going to start using a publisher and we're going to adapt. Like you're talking, like they came full circle on that. And I know a lot of those churches that you mentioned, some of them love it, but a lot of them are like, "Hey, if we had to start over again, we'd probably
Hmm.
just, like, take a pre-existing thing and then spend a ton of energy just, like, leveling it up for
Yeah.
us and creating, supplemental things like you talked about." So, the core of it is established, and then we can create whatever pieces we feel like are missing. I think there's there's a stewardship element in that. I think it's super
Mhm.
strategic. And I think moving forward, if I could do it all over again, I would probably tell people it's not always worth it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, so to take people behind the scenes for a little bit, and I'm not going to share specifics, but I'll share with you enough where you can connect the dots. So
Yeah.
I just said we had a team of 7 people. So let's just say 7 people on a full-time salary, whatever you think that means. You're paying 7 people for a whole year. That's
Yeah.
$1 amount that goes into it. There's a 3-year scope and sequence. So you're paying them for 3 years, realistically, probably 4 or more, because there's some lead time to
Yep.
develop this stuff. In addition to that, you might be paying for a studio or video equipment or creative resources or licensing materials, whatever. You're talking a project like this costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like if you
Yeah.
add all that together, like conservatively, that's what it costs to create that project. And so at the end of it, yeah, I don't think it was super surprising to say, hey, do we need to continue doing this
Mhm.
all the time? I think at some point in the future, it may be appropriate to bring that back. But that's a big investment, man. And I think you could go a long way by customizing and creating your own add-ons, if you will. You can accomplish a lot that way.
Yeah.
Well, Dan,
Absolutely.
this was such a good conversation, man. I want to keep going for another like hour, but I know we both have things going on. If people want to follow you or your ministry or anything that you're up to right now, where would you point them?
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on Instagram. I post ministry insights from time to time. Dan underscore Pollak, Pollak. But I would say like, yeah, we don't have a kids Instagram right now. We're one of the few churches. See, hey, big churches don't have it all, right? But Flatirons Church, you can find us on Instagram. We post stuff about our kids ministry on there and everything. And so, yeah, I would say those are kind of the areas that you can find me and everything. And I mean, if you're listening to this and you always want to connect, I love connecting with people. So, I mean, Jeremy slid in my DM. So,
I
you
did.
know,
Yep. That's how this
so
started, man.
this is
The
how it
beginning of a
started.
beautiful friendship. Yeah. Oh man. Well, listen, one thing I would tell people listening is don't hesitate to reach out. I think sometimes we get
Mm,
nervous about that or we feel like, man, I don't want to bother people, whatever. I don't know if I've met a single ministry leader who isn't open to just helping and serving however they can. And so if there's something that Dan said that you want a little more context on or just some insight on, man, hit him up, slide into the DMs just like I did way back when. Dude, thank you so much for coming on. This is really good. I still have a whole list of things that I want to talk about that we didn't have time for. So I'll definitely have to have you on again.
let's
This was
go.
such a good conversation. For everybody tuning in, thank you for listening to this conversation. We'll see you next time.